David, do you want to, I'm just saying the numbers are still growing, but do you want to introduce yourself and then I can hand over? Um, Yeah, so we work quite closely with the Environment Agency. They're currently doing some development work on the platform, specifically looking at a stakeholder web-based visualization tool. So David will sort of give a bit of a background on the EA's work on the platform and the development progress that they've made to date with this tool. So yeah, thank you for today, David. I'll hand over, and then if you yeah would like to share your slides, we can start.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much. Sharing. Okay, great. Hopefully that's coming through now for everybody. But yeah, so hi everybody, and thanks very much for joining the webinar today. So yeah, my name is David Pritchard. I work in what's called the National Appraisal Unit at the Environment Agency on kind of water resources modelling, and that has a lot of very close tie-in with DAFNI, which we'll be talking about today. So yeah, really thought maybe just try and cover three things in this talk. So firstly, just a bit of background to sort of national scale water resources modelling, you know, where it comes from, why we're interested in it, that sort of thing. Then we'll kind of introduce what's called the Water Resources of England and Wales model, which is a large kind of focus of our work on DAFNI. And then we'll sort of go in a little bit to developments, applications, and the kind of results visualization in collaboration with DAFNI that we're sort of working on at the moment. So yeah, beginning with a bit of background. So I've just put in here kind of an infographic from what's called the National Framework for Water Resources, or what's really the first national framework for water resources that was published a few years ago, 2020, I think. And the national framework really kind of sort of sets out to explore England's long-term water needs, really to kind of try and put some numbers on the scale of the challenge that we face going into the future in terms of ensuring sort of resilient water supplies, and that the abstraction of water that we take from the environment is you know, as sustainable as it can be. So yeah, the headline really from the first national framework is that action is kind of needed to ensure robust water supplies and environmental sustainability. So we have a headline figure of around 3,500 million extra litres of water per day being required into the future. So that's 3,500 megalitres per day, which is quite a lot in the context of it, an existing water supply of around 14 or 15,000 megalitres a day, sorry, for public water supply. There's kind of, yeah, a few sort of aspects to this. So there's kind of an identified need to make our systems more resilient to drought. We also have to consider growing population into the future, the impact of climate change as it unfolds, and as we say, this kind of need to ensure that abstractions are sustainable. This has a very sort of regional kind of breakdown to it as well. So you can see there's a bit of a bar chart in the bottom left panel there that kind of splits up the sort of need by region of the country. And we can see that a lot of sort of the pressures are concentrated in the southeast particularly. So kind of building on that sort of regional focus and the scale of the problem laid out by the national framework, one kind of important sort of outcome or follow on from the national framework was an increased kind of emphasis almost on regional planning that will kind of inform and complement water company scale planning. So water company scale planning has been undertaken for a good while, and plans are kind of constructed to sort of balance water supply and demand into the future. But with this kind of scale of the challenge we're facing, you know, sort of growing across regions and across the country, this sort of regional planning process was kind of introduced or emphasized as a complementary kind of approach. So regional plans, you know, also include things like looking at how can we reduce demand for water, how can we reduce the leakage rates in the network, but critically for us as well, what kind of new supplies would be, you know, important as we go forward, what would sort of fit in well to the system and kind of deliver robust supply and sustainability going forward. Yes, so kind of on that theme of essentially a challenge that crosses scales and a sort of a need for consideration of new sort of water supply options and infrastructure. One of the kind of routes through which some major schemes are being kind of explored is called the RAPID program. So RAPID stands for the Regulators Alliance for Progressing Infrastructure Development. So this is kind of collaboration really between the Environment Agency, Ofwat, Drinking Water Inspectorate, and working together with others to sort of look at some of these major supply schemes. And the map here, some of the text might be a little bit small, sorry, but essentially shows some of the kind of things that were or have been proposed. So this is as of last year, actually, so it might be slightly out of date as things move on. But essentially what we have is a collection of different types of options here. So some of them are new reservoirs, basically, that are kind of being sort of thought through and considered at the moment. So that, one sort of here called Cesro in the southeast, a couple in East Anglia, really. And then other types of options that are being considered here are transfers. So, for example, from the Midlands down to the southeast, using the Grand Union Canal as kind of a conduit for sort of transferring water across regions. And similarly, the sort of what's known as the sort of Severn Thames transfer, which would basically sort of move some surplus water potentially from the west of the country over towards the southeast. And then sort of finally, we have a more kind of almost treatment-based set of options to do with water recycling schemes and other things. So there's various kind of ideas being sort of explored at the moment, and that this kind of forms a lot of the work that our sort of team at the Environment Agency is interested in, these kind of major sort of infrastructure options. So then just to kind of go back to why we sort of interested in national scale water resources modelling in this context. So one kind of key reason for us is to evaluate the national scale coherence of plans and proposals that are being put forward. So essentially, if we see this need basically for planning on a regional scale, then we can also think there's probably a need to plan nationally about how everything fits together. So that's kind of key for us. This type of sort of modelling as well is also a really good way for us to improve our sort of understanding of the resilience of the infrastructure system, what kind of trade-offs are present, where dependencies and sensitivities lie. So obviously more conceptual understanding of the systems that we're trying to plan and manage for is always a good thing. And then finally, we can kind of also use some of this modelling to provide a kind of complementary sort of independent view on the modelling undertaken by water companies and regional groups and others. So sort of be able to feed into the kind of conversation and discussion, but by taking this kind of national lens rather than a water company specific lens or even a regional lens. So that kind of concludes the background I was going to give on this. There's obviously a lot more that goes on in the world of policy and water resources planning that develops over time, but hopefully that gives a bit of an idea of where some of the national scale focus in water resources modelling comes from particularly. So moving on now, the next part, I was really just going to introduce what's called the Water Resources of England and Wales model, or RWE. So this is the model that we run a lot on DAFNI effectively. So this is kind of one of our key tools. So the model was originally kind of developed sort of in kind of an academic collaboration and with other sectors as well. So this was sort of led by the University of Oxford for several projects really. And then over time, essentially that's the collaborations really being undertaken in what's called the sort of National System Simulation Project. So this brings together kind of the academic university partners with the Environment Agency, with the kind of RAPID Alliance, as well as consultants and obviously also with DAFNI as the kind of key sort of focus of where a lot of the technical sort of work and modeling takes place. So just to kind of contextualize the type of model that we're talking about here. So within our team, the National Appraisal Unit at the EA, we kind of use three types of models relatively routinely. So the first two that I've listed here are more kind of like higher level aggregated type models. And indeed, those first two are the ones that really underpinned the first national framework and are currently being used to sort of develop updated figures on the scale of the Water Resources Challenge in the second national framework, which is underway at the moment as a project. So those kind of higher level tools look at things like supply demand balance calculations across the country on a sort of annual time step. So kind of gross sort of course numbers really. And similarly, it's also able to perform certain types of kind of optimization to help evaluate different potential supply options. So things like could a new transfer between two parts of the country be feasible in high level terms and that sort of thing. But then really what we're talking about today is the third point, which is sort of detailed water resources systems modeling. And that's really what RU goes for and what this National System Simulation Project focuses on. So we'll explain a little bit more about that one. So the first point to note really is that the RU model sort of sits at the bottom of a modeling chain really. So there's a lot of kind of upstream dependencies that we have on other models. And we have this essentially the sequence where the outputs of one model then form the inputs to one or more sort of models down the chain. So at the very head of things there, we have some kind of climate modeling or climate data set. So a lot of the work with RU has been based on something called Weather at Home 2 in the past. So this is a kind of large ensemble sort of climate modeling data set or project that was undertaken a few years ago and provides kind of multiple realizations of how the climate might unfold into the future, kind of so taking into account both the kind of natural variability of the climate as well as the climate change sort of signal driven by anthropogenic forcings. So essentially from a climate model or climate data set, the key outputs for us are really potential evapotranspiration and precipitation, so primarily rainfall in the UK. And those basically feed into several of the other models. So next in the chain is Decipher. So this is a hydrological model, which is developed and run at the University of Bristol. And that model is essentially responsible for translating these kind of climate variables into river flows. And so river flows are one of the key sources of supply ultimately for water resources across much of the country. We do also actually kind of model irrigation water demand, a little bit less emphasis on that sometimes for us, as well as what we call a limiting abstraction groundwater models. This is effectively a statistical groundwater model that makes some attempt to essentially consider how much could be pumped from groundwater at every sort of time step through the period that we're simulating. So the dependencies there are really on what the climate's doing, but also how much has been pumped already in previous time steps. So it's a slightly complicated one, but that's obviously also important for us as groundwater is a major source of water supply across the southeast and other regions as well. So essentially, once we've kind of gone through these first parts of the chain and propagated the various inputs that we need to, we then have sort of everything that we need to go into the RU model itself. So this is a kind of an infrastructure system model, really. So essentially, key inputs there are river flows, this effectively potential groundwater pumping availability. But then on the other side as well, we also have to put in some prescribed demands for water. So effectively, the inputs from this side can contribute to supply. And then the key ones here are basically contributing to the demand side of the equation. So how much is required for public water supply, how much is required for non-public water supply, so things like agriculture, industry, and so on. And that essentially then leads us to some outputs, which are key things like sort of reservoir storage time series, water shortages if they occur, water use restrictions, so things like what would be formerly known as hosepipe bans and things. And so so that's really where ROO sort of sits in the chain. To kind of show a slightly outdated schematic, but to give you an overall flavor of how it looks. So this is a sort of map from featured in a paper by Barney Dobson a few years ago that basically sort of shows the major kind of elements of the ROO sort of water resources systems model. So we'll notice there's various different things plotted here. So obviously we've got rivers marked in blue there. We've got transfers between different locations, which are the black lines. And then we've also got a series of effectively nodes really as well. So reservoirs in the sort of red circles, blue for abstractions and groundwater in this case, yellow for demand nodes. So effectively these are things like centers where water will need to be abstracted for public supply. So like cities and towns and so on, depending on how they're grouped by the water companies. And then various other sort of junctions that allow things to kind of split and move in different directions. So so essentially that hopefully gives you a feel for the kind of sort of elements that are within this model. So really we're looking at kind of a network model here with some nodes of different types, and then some arcs that are primarily rivers, transfers, or other sort of pipelines or conduits for kind of moving water between locations or allowing that to take place. So the system model itself is built in some software called WAFNet, which is kind of a network flow allocation program. And essentially what WAFNet tries to do is allocate the water that we have available in rivers, groundwater, and kind of current reservoir storage to try and meet the demands and environmental needs every sort of day within our simulation period. And essentially it tries to do that in an optimal way according to a set of sort of rules, constraints, and preferences that govern how the water infrastructure system is operated. So obviously we have things like capacities. So obviously some pipelines will only have a capacity of a certain amount. We also have things like abstraction sort of licenses that need to be built in. So rules that govern how much water can be abstracted for a given purpose in a given location, and so on. And then we also have preferences in terms of how the system itself tends to be operated by water companies and others. So things like, is it sort of preferential to draw down one reservoir in advance of another, or to use one particular groundwater source over another one, and that kind of thing. So that's all kind of encoded into the model, and then WAFNet basically tries to take that into account when it's figuring out how to sort of allocate water around the network each day to meet these demands for public use, non-public use, and also to try and ensure that our environmental kind of targets, our minimum flows that we'd like to see in the rivers are met and respected effectively. So we can do a few different things with this type of model. So we can vary inputs. So this is things like climate projections, as mentioned earlier. or the level of demand within the system. Or alternatively, we can sort of change the actual system configuration itself. So this would be things like, what if we added in a new reservoir? What if we changed the capacity of a potential reservoir? And similarly, if we added a transfer or changed the capacity of the transfer, that kind of thing. So essentially allows us to play tunes and also to sort of think about what's being proposed and planned, and represent that within the model and see how things sort of turn out in our modeling world effectively. So just a quick example of how the network looks within our WAFNet software. So WAFNet has a kind of fantastically retro interface that can be used, and essentially from the kind of high level schematic, if we sort of zoom in around the London area, we can see that, we have kind of quite a reasonable amount of detail anyway on the sort of system as it works. So down here, we've got effectively, hopefully my cursor's coming through, but the Thames is effectively represented along here. And then we have a sort of major abstraction around Windsor that transfers water over to a group of reservoirs really that we kind of lump together and refer to as the London storages, from which we can then basically supply the London demand centre. So this is effectively a water resource zone really. So it's kind of aggregated in the sense that we sort of get down to this kind of level of detail and not obviously into pipes to specific parts of the city and that kind of thing. That hopefully gives you a flavour of the kind of network that we're talking about. So in recent years, we've kind of made advances in RU in 3 phases of the National System Simulation Modelling project. So the first phase was kind of largely about sort of proof of concept testing for what individual SROs. So SRO stands for Strategic Resource Option here, and these are the kind of schemes within the RAPID program that we showed the map for earlier. The second phase of the project looked more at kind of testing the robustness of SROs kind of considered together and under selected climate, demand and sustainability scenarios. And then the third phase has been more about sort of attempting to investigate the full sort of plans from the most recent water resource management planning round. So that's known as WRMP 24, where WRMP stands for Water Resources Management Plan. So just kind of briefly then on a couple of results from phase 1 and phase 2 really. So here we're essentially showing an example of model performance. So how well does the RU model sort of capture sort of behavior across the water resources infrastructure system. And we picked out essentially a couple of reservoirs here at Lake Vyrnwy and in the Derwent Valley. And so we're plotting basically time series of storage for reservoir storage for particular years, and making a comparison in this case with sort of roughly equivalent water company modeling over the same time periods. So essentially, this is hopefully a reasonable sort of reflection of what's quite a large amount of data and on performance that we could visualize. But essentially, what we often find is that the RU model shows a lot of kind of behavioral similarities with some of the water company modeling, but we often don't tend to sort of have a perfect agreement, which is potentially for a number of reasons, obviously. So this is a kind of model to model comparison, and there's other sort of factors like we to simulate at the national scale, we kind of reduce the level of detail compared to water company modeling and so on. So we don't necessarily represent every single factor in quite the same way. But in general, we're fairly encouraged by things that sort of look behaviorally similar, I would say. So similar kind of timing of drawdown in the reservoirs, similar kind of rates of response, and sort of degrees of variation within the time series, and so on. So yeah, for a national model, yeah, we're sort of not doing too badly, and the focus of work kind of continually is seeing where we can make improvements. And then sort of finally for this part, just to pick up on other aspects of phase 2, yeah, just thought I'd kind of show some of the headline stuff that came out of that work. So this was published a couple of years ago now, really, as well. And essentially, yeah, it was kind of looking, as we said before, at sort of these strategic resource options together, and essentially looking at things like how does the probability of shortfall change if we don't have any of these options going forward compared with if we do have options. And essentially, we can see some headline things like the probability of sort of shortfalls. So a shortfall being effectively a failure to kind of meet all of the demand for water, basically can be significantly reduced across lots of the areas that were sort of causing problems in the run that didn't include any SROs. So yeah, and I'd add as well that these results are a little bit older now and out of date, so it's yeah kind of illustrative rather than necessarily the latest yeah kind of findings on these things or anything like that, but just to sort of show the kind of comparisons really that were made within phase 2, and the types of things that we can sort of look at with this model, you know, where we have current system configuration, and then if we sort of build in some of these bigger reservoirs and transfers and things that are being sort of thought about, you know, we can test the effects of that process sort of across the whole country. Great, so yeah, just to kind of move on a little bit then towards yeah kind of more current work on DAFNI with the sort of closer connection to visualization. So yeah, just very briefly, for us, DAFNI kind of facilitates essentially parallelized large-scale national simulations based on reasonably large ensemble kind of climate projections as well. So typically with Weather at Home 2, we run 100 ensemble members, but we've recently run larger ensembles of stochastic climate data sort of forcings as well. So DAFNI's kind of scaled very well for us so far. We've also basically found that kind of collaboration in terms of data, results, workflows, visualizations has been really good, as well as when we sort of try and bring new people up to speed with the model, and we kind of have nice sort of workflows, versioning and parameter sets to be able to kind of draw on in that process, which yeah has really helped us kind of yeah make it easier for people to work with what's a relatively sort of large and complicated model. Yeah, we've done a number of things on DAFNI, or carried out a number of work streams on DAFNI over the past year, really, within this kind of yeah phase 3 of the National System Simulation Modeling project. So kind of alongside investigating these WRMP 24 sort of planning scenarios, we've also sort of looked at the relationships between drought characteristics and supply vulnerability across the country. We've looked at forcing our sort of modeling chain with different climate data sets, as we mentioned earlier. Yeah, kind of updates and refinements to both the statistical groundwater modeling as well as the hydrological modeling, and then this ongoing process of kind of improving our representation of the system across key areas of the model. So essentially can show a few sort of visualization examples related to some of these points shortly. Just also to kind of show as well that our typical workflow on DAFNI looks something like this. So this is focused on the RU system model, so the kind of bottom of the modeling chain that we described earlier. So effectively we have a pre-processing step where we kind of can configure different sort of climate demand and sustainability scenarios or combinations of scenarios. That basically then the pre-processing step kind of provides us with time series of what we call inflows, which is effectively river flows that will go into the systems model, as well as our sort of potential groundwater availability and demand sort of inputs for WAFNet as well. So that basically provides everything we need to kind of get that final step in the modeling chain running. Then with that, we can basically move on to a simulation step. And so the kind of user configuration options there are to do with the sort of network itself, so the network topology if we want to change it, but also if there's something in the system operation that we want to change as well. So if we need to change a capacity, if we need to change a preference for how the system should be operated, then we can do that here. That then provides us with a large number of daily time series of kind of flows of water through the model network, as well as reservoir storages, supply shortfalls. So effectively, if we fail to meet demand somewhere, how much have we missed it by? And also water use restrictions. So again, things that would formerly be known as hosepipe bans, but also more severe restrictions as well that would be much more inconvenient for people to to endure. So yeah, and we basically get this kind of set of time series for every kind of member of the ensemble that we run. So if we have 100 realizations of climate into the future, then we'll get 100 sets of time series of these various terms or variables that we then want to kind of do something with. And that basically feeds into our post-processing step. So we have a kind of predefined list of statistics really that are most key for us. That includes things like probabilities of seeing supply shortfalls or water use restrictions, as well as summary statistics on some of those terms as well. And this essentially then feeds into our kind of visualization steps that follow. So our visualization really is for a range of kind of stakeholders and partners within this project. So this would include academics and researchers, water companies and regional groups, and then also regulators. So that would both be people within the Environment Agency for us, as well as other sort of regulators or regulatory groups, for example, RAPID. And there's a sort of mixture of specialist and non-specialist backgrounds who essentially we want to talk to about our modeling results. So kind of a range of levels of technical sort of expertise. So what we've put together here really is some examples from using both traditional sort of figures really that follow from work that we've done on DAFNI, as well as the sort of more kind of recently developed interactive plotting tools that we've been working on DAFNI as well. So I'll just kind of maybe show a few of these. So one example of a kind of work that we've done on DAFNI and visualized, and that kind of follows a more traditional figure approach, so a non-interactive figure in this case, was basically when we were kind of looking at the question of how does the RU model compare with Thames Water's model when forced by the same stochastic climate data set. So what this means effectively is going back to the head of the modeling chain to the climate inputs and saying, if we take this alternative climate data set, which happens to be the one that's sort of used by Thames Water and others as part of their water resource management planning sort of process, do we get quite similar sort of results in terms of key metrics of interest, so these sort of supply shortfalls and water use restrictions, or do we kind of see some differences and deviations and that kind of thing? And so this is kind of interest to us because we obviously kind it's good for us to understand how our model compares with water company models, and often to kind of learn from the more detailed representations available in water company models of, where can we make further improvements to our model, if there's differences, can we have sort of a conversation to understand, where those types of things come from. So the first kind of plot here basically is an attempt to sort of summarize the stochastic climate input data set itself. So the stochastic data set comprises essentially 400 replicates or ensemble members, each of 48 years in duration. And those sort of replicates or ensemble members are not sort of strictly independent. So in contrast to some types of stochastic modeling, they effectively share a set of predictor variables, if you like, which kind of, sort of helps explain why when we sort of plot up time series, they often sort of look like they're playing tunes on the observed historical sequence. So this was something that we kind of wanted to communicate a little bit internally to do with how these kind of stochastic data sets work. And effectively, what we've plotted here is a sort of time series heat map or histogram of effectively precipitation or rainfall, but transformed into what's called the standardized precipitation index. So essentially, this is almost like kind of centering it on the average. So on the y-axis there, 0 is basically the mean or the average, and then everything above 0 indicates wetter than average, and everything below 0 indicates drier than average. And then if we think that we've got these kind of 400 individual replicates or ensemble members, then we can kind of condense that down a little bit by essentially plotting the frequency with which they occur in different sort of parts of that range of standardized precipitation index. So where the sort of purpley colors are indicates sort of that not many of these 400 time series pass through that kind of wing-till bin really on this graph. And then when we get towards the orange and yellow colors, we're basically saying that lots of the replicates are kind of making their way through that particular part of the graph. And so then there's, we can basically, if we compare with the sort of solid black line, which is the observations, we can kind of start to understand how these stochastic realizations are sort of non-independent and also, related to what happened in the past in terms of the actual sequence of variability that we experienced between 1950 and 2000, really. So there's a lot of sort of tracking between the yellowy orange colors and the solid black line here. That also sort of means from our perspective that where these sort of stochastic ensemble members form droughts, they tend to do so around kind of known historical droughts. So 1976 is kind of the sharpest, probably, a sort of severe kind of drought within this record. And we can see that this is a point at which the stochastic sort of, ensemble sort of also follows that pattern, basically, that a lot of droughts are kind of concentrated around there. And what we can also do with this is basically think about, if we're interested in droughts, how could we sort of identify drought events from this type of data? One way to go about that essentially is to say, if we've got some kind of threshold, which is the dotted line here, if we look for the peaks that go sort of below that threshold, then we can sort of help to use those to define drought events. So in 1976, we can see we go well below our sort of critical dotted threshold here. And then we can say, okay, so this is probably an event, and we can essentially perform that same operation on each of those stochastic replicates, and kind of eventually, if we go through all of them, come up with what we might call like an event, a drought event sort of library So effectively all of the events in this big data set that comprise drought, and some of those will obviously also come from other parts of the time series as well. So not just 1976, but we see other sort of drought occurrences too. So then in terms of our sort of original question of how does our RU modelling compare with Thames Water's modelling, basically just put in here a plot that we sort of shared with and presented to Thames Water kind of modelers recently as well. So yeah, kind of a slightly different stakeholder here. We're kind of engaging with with the water company itself to kind of get their views and feedback on some of our work. And essentially the premise here is that if we have identified this kind of drought event library through the sort of approach that we've described before, then we can also actually sort of visualize the characteristics of those droughts. So droughts will sort of tend to have some kind of duration. So in here it's given in months. So yeah, sort of yeah, we'll have 1, 2 years, 2 years, 3 years, so on. Some very long droughts of yeah over 5 years in duration, according to this approach. And then we can also have a characteristic that sort of defines the yeah, almost like the intensity or severity of the drought. So if we go back to this slide, we can basically see that we'd have a duration probably of this kind of length around the 1976 drought, and then a severity that would be related to how far this line kind of drops below zero. So in this case, quite severe. Yeah, and then what we've done is
David, sorry,
yeah.
just quickly, can you just hide the Zoom thing there? I can't click, it's on your screen. Thank you. Sorry, someone's just asked in the chat on the graph. Thank you.
Apologies. Yeah, I didn't realize that was visible. Yeah, so yeah, sorry, just to pick this one up then. So essentially we can plot every event in our drought library as these blue circles, which are the same on both panels here. So that comes from the same stochastic climate data set at the head of the modeling chain. And then we can also essentially pick out the ones in orange here that are associated with sort of the most severe kind of types of water use restrictions in London in this case. So this is, yeah, I guess what's known as level 4 water use restrictions, which is, yeah, kind of things like stand pipes. So having to go into the street to actually sort of get your water that way. So yeah, severe cases of drought. And essentially what we can see is that both the Thames Water kind of modelling and our modelling sort of place the orange circles in similar locations. So we actually have a few less than in the Thames Water modelling, which there's probably a few reasons for, but probably more importantly, we can see that in both cases we sort of reach this sort of yeah, frontier almost, where in both of the models we can sort of get to these severe water use restrictions from droughts of, say, yeah, slightly shorter duration that have quite a high mean intensity. So, you know, things that kind of kick in and develop into severe drought quite quickly. But then equally, we could have something that lasted for a longer time, has a sort of lower mean intensity, but can also be associated with these sort of more severe levels of water use restrictions. So there's almost kind of a relationship in this frontier between the length of the drought and how kind of severely it develops, how quickly it gets to yeah, big deviations from average rainfall and so on. So yeah, that's just kind of one example of yeah, the kind of thing that we could yeah, discuss and explain with sort of relatively technical stakeholders on this. I will skip over this one just to get on to the interactive sort of tools a bit more. So yeah, we've been working on kind of interactive results and model behavior sort of exploration tools that kind of span sort of a range of high level to detail focused visualizations. And again, this is work that's undertaken on DAFNI. So we've basically written something that's still kind of being worked on in Python using a couple of particular sort of groups of packages. And yeah, we've kind of got to the stage of sort of being close to sort of initial deployment, thanks to some really great work from the DAFNI team. So just to kind of show a little bit of that quickly. Change what we share. So this is our kind of sort of tool as it stands, I suppose. So as I say, kind of all built in Python, and basically, kind of still under development, but sort of making progress. So effectively, we've got kind of a homepage which we can sort of use to load in results from different model scenarios that we run. So I won't kind of go through this today. I've sort of preloaded some data sets just to have a bit of a look at. But the idea with this tool is that we sort of have a range of things that we can then go through and explore. And essentially the kind of complexity or level of detail of the visualization sort of increases as we move from left to right. So the idea a little bit is that we have some kind of high level, simple summary stuff that should be relatively accessible once we've made a kind of a little bit more progress, perhaps through to things that are kind of getting into quite detailed exploration of the model and its behavior that will be of interest for quite sort of technically oriented stakeholders. So yeah, I guess in the interest of time, I'll probably just pick out a couple of things to look at. So one type of figure that we have, and again, this is probably for sort of people, stakeholders within water resources with some understanding of how things work. But essentially, we can do things like look at a particular region of the country. So these regions are the sort of regional groups in some of the maps that we showed earlier. So WRSE is Water Resources Southeast. This then gives us a set of kind of key sort of parts of the model. So really key sort of water resource zones or demand centres in this case. So for example, London, which we looked at earlier, is here, as well as Portsmouth, Reading, Swindon and Oxfordshire. And then, what's known as the affinity water resources zones. And then we can basically do things like explore different types of quantities of interest. So in this case, shortfall years, and basically choose different scenarios to look at as well. So in this case, visualizing some older results from runs without these kind of strategic resource options, and then runs with the strategic resource options. And then that basically, here we've kind of translated into a sort of heat map. So effectively, we've got our kind of individual replicates or ensemble members along the horizontal axis. We've got these kind of demand centers within the model, which effectively towns, cities, areas on the y-axis. And then we can basically quickly see, okay, if we've got some colors that are not white, then we know that there's some shortfall years within the modeling, which is potentially of interest to us to then sort of go and explore in more detail, really. So for example, if we go down to London, we can basically quickly identify that we've got a particular sort of replicate within our sort of quite large data set, and that's showing some potential shortfall issues that we might want to sort of investigate in more detail. Or, alternatively, we can look elsewhere and see, what's going on in other places. And really, this helps us to kind of pinpoint quite quickly where we need to sort of focus attention in understanding what's kind of going on in our modeling sometimes. So if we move to like a higher level of detail again, then we can kind of get into the world of actually sort of unpicking the time series themselves that come out of the model. So from this sort of tab here, we were able to identify a particular replicate of interest where we know that there's some severe kind of behavior going on. So actually some very sort of severe future droughts kind of forecast or not forecast, but sort of simulated really within this sort of particular realization of how future climate could unfold. And then we can kind of, explore in a bit more detail what kind of goes on within the system. So again, we can sort of plot up our various scenarios. So if we don't include the strategic resource options, then we get the red time series here. If we do include them, then we get the blue time series. We can essentially see things like, with these resource options available, we're able to kind of maintain a higher level of storage within the reservoirs in this kind of London group throughout what's actually a very severe drought. So we essentially kind of get down to a storage of 0. If we don't have the strategic resource options in the simulation relatively early, whereas when we do have them included, we're able to kind of maintain a good level of storage much longer, and we're able to kind of recover our storage much more quickly as well. And then so that translates into things like shorter periods where we have these kind of level of service, so really water use restriction events. So this kind of level 4 that we were sort of talking about before of very severe water use restrictions is far kind of reduced when we have the strategic resource options available in this run. And then similarly, our actual sort of supply shortfalls are massively kind of reduced as well. So we kind of are down to just one much smaller sort of shortfall compared to what would essentially add up to quite a larger shortfall if the SROs aren't available. So this is kind of a relatively sort of detailed view, but something that's quite helpful for communicating in particular circumstances. So that's probably enough really. I've probably talked for too long. But anyway, just to kind of summarize. We have this kind of national scale water resources systems model, RU, developed through cross-sector kind of collaboration that can be used to sort of help take a strategic view on water supply infrastructure kind of requirements and proposals. And as we mentioned earlier, DAFNI has been instrumental really in kind of facilitating the ongoing development and application of the model, as well as sort of opening up new kind of options for us in terms of visualization, which that's still sort of evolving really, but definitely kind of moving forward, I think. I will stop there.
Thank you, David. You can stop the share if you want. It's great to showcase the work the Environment Agency are doing and how DAFNI supports that too. And thank you for showing the stakeholder visualization tool. It looks like it's come on quite a lot, and you've been obviously working hard and busy in the background on that. Just with time, I just want to open the floor up if there's any questions. I think there's one in the chat for now, but anybody on the call does want to add or please do ask a question for David before the webinar closes today. Over to you, Linz.
Yep, so the one question we have, are differences of evaporation from different crops or land use included in the model, or is that too detailed?
So I guess currently within the hydrology, it's probably the hydrological modelling is probably not explicitly sort of accounted for at the moment. Decipher is essentially probably calibrated at a slightly coarser kind of resolution effectively than might resolve some of that detail, but it's certainly the kind of thing that could be brought in as we sort of develop things further into the future. So obviously other hydrological and groundwater modelling will explicitly try and make account for crop sort of coefficients and so on. But we're a little bit simpler at the moment on that front.
Great, thank you. Brian's got a question.
Yep, so a question from Brian is, how is water leakage managed in the model? Can you identify where leakage is an issue?
So our model kind of sort of primarily sort of works upstream of sort of almost like the distribution network to actual individual sort of houses and settlements and so on. So we're kind of again at a bit of a bit of a coarser resolution, and working on the sort of slightly larger scale side of the infrastructure, I suppose. So yeah, at the moment we don't necessarily have a kind of detailed representation of leakage. We do sort of try and consider things like losses where we know that they occur. So if a particular treatment works causes a degree of loss from the system, then we can try and build that in. And similarly with some of these strategic resource options, if there's kind of known losses associated with conveying water over particular distances or something, then that we can kind of build in as well. But some of the more kind of fine-grained leakage considerations are probably a little bit beyond our model at the moment.
Thank you. I don't know if, Brian, you're asking that in relation to Liz Varga's work. Are you in contact with Liz Varga, David?
I'm not. I don't think Johnny might be. I'm not sure.
Yeah, she's running a project on that topic. So yeah, it might be good to sort of connect you up, and I can double check with Johnny. There's another question that's come into the box.
Yeah, is there any kind of projection data for the water resources and the effect of the climate change on that?
Yes, yeah. So yeah, that might be a question to clarify, which I can happily do afterwards as well. But yeah, certainly there's lots of projections out there. I guess are sort of modeling results kind of reported in phases, for example. So there's the first 2 phases of the project I described have been sort of published, and the third phase will be published as well. Obviously, there's also kind of other open projections of climate and hydrology and so on. So yeah, but happy to pick that up if that's not a satisfactory answer.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's 1 o'clock now, so we'll try and keep to time and close the webinar on time. So yeah, thanks again to David for a great webinar and presentation today. We will be putting the, if David's happy to put the slides up and the recording up, we'll put that on the website and we can share that round. But if anyone does have any questions that they haven't had time to ask today, please do get in touch with us and we can put you in touch with David. So yeah, thanks everyone for your time. Hope you enjoyed the webinar and we'll share it on the website. Have a great afternoon. Bye.